Millionaire. CEO receives a hug by mistake from a poor girl. Now he wants to make her his wife. The mistake that changed her life. It was just a hug. 1 second of emotion. One wrong silhouette in a crowded airport. She thought it was her brother, but the man she embraced wasn't family. He was Brian Carter, a billionaire no one dared touch. And she, just a poor waitress trying to survive. People stared. He smiled, and the moment should have ended in silence. But it didn't, because for the first time in his carefully controlled life, someone held him like he was just a man, not a name, not a fortune, just him. And from that mistake came a story no one saw coming. The girl with too much to carry. Emily Parker never asked for attention. She moved through life like most girls no one notices quietly. Quickly, with her shoulders always a little tense, an apron at her waist, calluses on her fingers, a job that paid too little, a brother who needed too much, and a dream that hadn't dared speak up in years. Most days, she didn't look people in the eye, not because she was shy, but because she didn't have the energy to hope they'd see her. She worked at a cafe in Terminal B of JFK International Airport. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't stable, but it kept Oliver's prescriptions filled and the lights on in their one-bedroom walk-up in Queens. She hadn't seen her older brother in months. He was flying home after finishing a seasonal construction job in Nevada. So when the crowd parted and she spotted dark hair, broad shoulders, that familiar shape, her heart did what hearts often do when they've been waiting too long. It leapt. She ran fast, fearless, crashing through rows of weary travelers. And then she hugged him, hard, without hesitation, arms tight, chin tucked into a chest that felt off, too firm, too still, too expensive. The scent hit her next woody, masculine, expensive, not the cheap cologne her brother wore, but something smooth and commanding. And then the voice. Well, that was unexpected. Emily pulled back, her heart sinking, because this wasn't her brother. This was a stranger, a dangerously handsome one, wearing a suit tailored to power, eyes like storm clouds gray, steady, unreadable. People stared. Security stepped in, and still he didn't look away. "I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I thought you were someone else. I wasn't looking. I have emotional nearsightedness." Emotional what? When your heart overrides your brain and makes you hug billionaires by mistake. He smiled. That should have been the end. But hours later, soaked in embarrassment and caffeine, Emily heard her name called from across the cafe. "Special order, table 12. She turned tray in hand, and there he was, Brian Carter, the man she had mistakenly embraced, now sitting at her cafe, now asking to be served by her. "Looks like fate's clumsy," he said, "but persistent." Emily's stomach turned, because the last thing she needed was attention, especially from a man whose world was made of glass towers, sharp suits, and headlines. "I don't care who you are," she said quietly. "I don't want anything from you." He smiled again. "That's exactly why I'm still here." She didn't want to fall for anyone, especially not a man who looked like he'd never heard the word no. But something about him was already too late to unfeel. Chapter 1. The Hug Heard. Round the terminal. It began, as many disasters do, with good intentions. Emily hadn't slept much the night before. Her shift started at 5 a.m., and by noon, she was surviving on vending machine peanuts and prayer. But today was different. Her older brother, Jesse, was flying home, and for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of joy in her chest. He was all she had. After their parents passed, after the bills piled up, after Oliver's illness took center stage, Jesse was the one who held the house together. And now, after working construction jobs out west, he was finally coming back. Emily stood at the arrival terminal, gripping her phone and craning her neck, heart hammering. The place was loud and crowded, but she swore She saw him, dark hair, tall build, hoodie, rolling suitcase. She didn't think, she just ran. Arms wide, smile, breaking open like sunlight. Emily threw herself at him, hugged him like the world owed her this one moment of warmth. Only, it wasn't Jesse. And it took 3 whole seconds for her body to realize what her brain hadn't. His chest was wrong hard, firm, too still. His scent was wrong, crisp, musky, elegant, not Jesse's cheap aftershave. And then his hands touched her shoulders gently, but firmly, and pulled back. Emily opened her eyes and looked up. He wasn't just a stranger. He was breathtaking, tall, impossibly put together. Like Wall Street had carved a statue and dressed it in Armani, but it wasn't the suit or the sharp jawline that froze her. It was his eyes, gray, stormy, still. He didn't look startled. He looked intrigued. That was unexpected. He said, her mouth open. Nothing came out. Then, oh my God, I'm so sorry. She backed away so fast. She nearly tripped over a child's suitcase. I didn't see clearly I have this condition. Emotional nearsightedness. It's not real. I saw someone I love and ran without thinking. And oh no, shut up. Emily, he raised an eyebrow. Emotional nearsightedness. It means sometimes your heart sees what it wants to see instead of what's actually there. He laughed quietly, which somehow made it worse. A man in black approached, broad-shouldered, earpiece, serious. Mr. Carter, is everything all right? Emily froze. That name. She knew that name. Brian Carter, one of the most powerful names in New York finance. A CEO with a face rarely seen in public and a fortune built on digital banking empires, and she had just thrown herself at him. Emily blinked. I need to find my brother and maybe move to a different continent. Understandable, Brian said. But before you disappear to Alaska, can I ask, are you afraid of billionaires? I'm afraid of going viral. He smiled again. She turned and fled. But as she weaved back into the crowd, she felt it. The unmistakable pull of his gaze following her. Later that day, exhausted and red-faced, Emily returned to work. She tied on her apron at the cafe near Terminal B, trying to push the incident into the deep freezer of her mind. But it followed her like the scent of burnt espresso, especially when, halfway through her shift, her manager appeared. Special order, table 12. She grabbed the tray, balanced the cups, walked over, and stopped cold. Brian Carter, sitting there, like he belonged in a place that sold $3 pastries and lukewarm coffee. We meet again, he said, eyes glittering with mischief. You, she whispered. Me. He leaned back in his chair. And this time, it looks like you're serving me. Her cheeks burned. She set the cup down carefully, trying not to spill. You're not stalking me, are you? If I were, would you blame me? Yes. Fair. She tried to walk away. Wait. She turned, slowly. Do you always run off so fast? He asked. Do you always sit at cafes, hoping the wrong girl hugs you again? He laughed. Maybe it's fate, or an airport with limited coffee options. Fair point. And then, can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Was it really a mistake? She blinked. The hug. Was it really a mistake? Or were you just in the mood to throw yourself at a stranger? Her mouth dropped open. You're insufferable. I've been called worse. She turned, flustered, heart pounding. But something strange happened. As she walked away, she smiled, just a little, and somewhere behind her, Brian Carter smiled too. Because he knew this was just the beginning. He wasn't the man she meant to hug, but somehow, he was already the one she couldn't stop thinking about. Chapter 2. The Girl Behind the Apron. Emily didn't believe in fate. She believed in rent, due by the 5th, in tips that barely covered bus fare, in lukewarm coffee and blisters from double shifts. She believed in people leaving when life got too hard, and in carrying more than your fair share because no one else would. So when Brian Carter, the man she accidentally hugged, the billionaire she could never afford to admire, showed up again the next morning, sitting at the same table, with that same unreadable expression. She didn't smile. She scowled. You know, this is a public cafe, not your personal meeting room, right? Brian looked up from his phone, amused. You make it sound like I'm not welcome. You're a billionaire. You're not supposed to be comfortable here. Then maybe I'm here to be uncomfortable. You're doing a great job. She handed him his coffee this time, without spilling or stammering, and walked off. Her co-workers whispered behind the counter, "Is that him?" Did she really hug him at the airport? Why is he back again? Emily ignored them. She didn't care what anyone thought. Okay, maybe she cared a little, but mostly she was confused. Why was he here? Why her? And why did it matter? It kept happening. Every morning, Brian Carter sat at table 12. He always ordered the same coffee, always tipped exactly 30%, always asked for her. He didn't flirt. He didn't gloat. He just watched, listened, asked questions like they were secrets worth waiting for. Do you like it here? How long have you been working? What would you do if you weren't doing this? One day, she snapped. Why do you keep showing up? She asked. Voice sharp, Brian stirred his coffee slowly, then looked up. Because I like talking to someone who doesn't expect anything from me. She frowned. What do you mean? People look at me and see dollar signs, or stories, or headlines, but you look at me like I'm just a guy who sat at the wrong table. She didn't respond. Not right away, because part of her understood it too well, what it meant to be seen for everything, but who you are. They didn't talk about it again, but the silence between them began to change. It wasn't empty anymore. It was comfortable, familiar, like the kind that forms when two people are slowly, cautiously becoming something. One afternoon, after a long shift, she found herself wiping down table 12 after he'd left. He'd forgotten his napkin, or maybe left it on purpose. There were only 3 words scribbled on it. Still fate. She stared at the note, folded it, slipped it into her apron pocket, and for the first time since her world became all about surviving, she wondered what it might feel like to be chosen. He saw her before the world did. Not the waitress, not the mistake, just the girl behind the apron, and something in her eyes that whispered, I won't be easy to love, but I'll be real. Chapter 3. Dinner with a Stranger. Emily found the note 3 more times, once inside a sugar packet, once scribbled on a coffee sleeve, and once, most annoyingly, taped to the tip jar. Dinner, you and me, 1 hour, say yes. She rolled her eyes, crumpled it, and kept it in her purse anyway. She told herself she wouldn't go. She had no dress, no time, no reason to say yes to a man who smiled like he owned the sky. But at 6:59 p.m., she was outside the address he'd written in bold ink. It wasn't the kind of restaurant with valet service or velvet ropes. It was understated, warm, all wood grain and candlelight. The kind of place built for conversation, not performance. She took a breath, walked inside, and there he was, Brian Carter, in a black button-up, with his sleeves rolled, looking like he hadn't ruled an empire that morning. When he saw her, he stood, didn't speak, just looked, not like she was a charity case, not like a surprise, but like a decision. You came, he said quietly. I'm still deciding if that was a mistake. It wasn't. They sat. He didn't order wine, didn't show off, didn't make her feel small. Instead, he asked, what's the one thing you never tell people? Emily blinked. That's not first date conversation. Then, let's skip to the good part. She stirred her water. Okay, I hate needing people. I hate it more than I hate black coffee. And I really hate black coffee." He smiled. "I hate that people assume I'm untouchable. Like money makes you invincible to loneliness." She looked at him. "Then not as a man with $1 billion company, but as a man who said loneliness, like he knew the shape of it." The food arrived. She barely noticed it, because something about this stranger felt familiar. Not his clothes, not his status, but the quiet in him, the hunger for something real. Midway through dinner, he asked, "What do you dream about when you let yourself dream?" She paused. "I used to dream about reopening my parents' restaurant. Then life happened. Bills happened. Reality stepped in with its steel boots. But the dream's still there. Sometimes, when I'm not too tired to remember it." Brian nodded slowly, then leaned in. "I never had a real dream, just goals and numbers. But lately, it's been changing." "Why?" He didn't answer right away. "Because of you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of the possibility of something they both hadn't dared want for a long time. After dinner, they walked outside. A breeze swept her hair back. Emily crossed her arms, not from the cold, but from the quiet panic of being seen too clearly. Brian took off his jacket and placed it around her shoulders without a word. She narrowed her eyes. "You know, this doesn't mean I'm suddenly yours, right?" "I know. And I still don't want to be rescued." "I'm not here to rescue you," he said. "I'm here because I don't want to be alone." That stopped her, because he didn't say he wanted her. He said he needed someone real, and maybe so did she. It wasn't the food. It wasn't the candles. It was the way he looked at her, like she wasn't ordinary, but essential. Chapter 4. The Truth About Oliver. Emily had mastered the art of pretending. Pretending she wasn't tired. Pretending her hands didn't ache. Pretending she didn't feel something. Every time Brian Carter walked into the cafe, like the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. But what she couldn't pretend was that her little brother was getting worse. It started with headaches, then fevers that wouldn't break, then a hospital visit that shattered her remaining illusions. The diagnosis: early-stage kidney failure, manageable but expensive, and the word transplant floated somewhere just out of reach like a threat. Emily sat in the cold hospital hallway, knees to chest, while Oliver slept in the room down the hall. Her hands trembled. There was no insurance, no family, no plan, just her. The next morning, she showed up to work like always, apron tied, smile stitched on, eyes hollow, and as if he had a sixth sense for her unraveling. Brian was already waiting table 12. Of course, she brought his coffee in silence, set it down, turned to leave. "Emily," he said softly. She froze. "What happened?" "Nothing," she whispered. "You're lying." She turned to face him, then really face him. And something in her broke. "My brother," she said. "He's sick. He needs treatment, and I can't afford it." Brian didn't flinch. He didn't ask details. He just said the words that nearly made her knees buckle. "I'll pay for everything." The air shifted. Her voice came out sharp, instinctive. "No, absolutely not. Emily, you don't get to buy your way into my life. It's not about buying anything. It's about helping. It's always about power with people like you." "Then let's make it a deal," he said quietly. "So you don't owe me anything." She narrowed her eyes. "What kind of deal?" He held her gaze. 7 days. You cook for me. 3 meals a day. I'll pay you for your time. Enough to cover the hospital bills." Emily laughed bitterly. "So now I'm a personal chef?" "No," he said gently. "You're the only person I trust to bring warmth into that empty apartment." She swallowed hard. Her pride screamed no, but her brother's life was louder. And so she said the only thing she could: deal. That night, back in the apartment she shared with Oliver, She sat on the floor, with a bowl of soup between them. He was tired, pale, but smiled, the way only little brothers can, like she was still his superhero. "You look worried," he said. "I'm always worried," she smiled. "But I've got a plan." "Does this plan involve a billionaire with a dumb face?" She froze. "You've been reading my texts again." "Nope. Just saw the way you looked at him on TV. You like him." She ruffled his hair. "You need better hobbies." But she didn't deny it. Not this time. Because she did like Brian Carter. She just didn't know if that made her brave or foolish. He offered money. She demanded terms, but neither of them expected the real deal to be what couldn't be bought. Trust. Chapter 5. 7 days in a sky castle. The next morning, Emily stood in front of a building that didn't just scrape the sky, it seemed to own it. Polished glass, private security, a doorman who blinked twice when she said, "I'm here to cook." For Mr. Carter, they escorted her to a private elevator, silent and seamless. The ride was smooth, but her nerves were not. By the time the doors slid open, she was already preparing her exit strategy. Until she stepped into the apartment, it wasn't what she expected. Not gold, not chandeliers, no glittering trophies or bragging rights. Just stillness, space, and a view of the city that made her knees soften. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sky in every direction. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a painting someone forgot to hang emotion in. And there, at the far end of the room, barefoot in gray slacks and a navy sweater, was Brian, holding a coffee mug like he didn't know what to do with it. "You came," he said. "You didn't think I would?" "No," he said honestly, "but I hoped." He showed her the kitchen. It was cold, chrome, untouched, the kind of place designed by architects, not cooks. It had never smelled like garlic or burnt toast. It had never hosted an argument or a story. Until now. "You sure this thing turns on?" she asked, pointing to the stove. "I assume so," he replied. "It cost enough." "That's not the same as warmth, Carter. That's why I brought you." Day 1, she made breakfast. He didn't interfere. Day 2, she made lunch. He hovered nearby. Day 3, he asked her how she learned to cook. "My parents. We had a restaurant." "Until we didn't." He nodded, said nothing. But the next morning, she noticed fresh basil on the counter. He'd remembered. By day 4, he stopped working in the other room and started working in the kitchen, sitting at the island, reading emails, watching her. "Don't you have companies to run?" she asked. "Chopping onions." "I delegated," he said. "You're more interesting than the market." They fell into a rhythm. He brought her ingredients she didn't ask for. She left sticky notes on the fridge, teasing him about his terrible handwriting. They didn't talk about his money, or her brother, or the line between them. They just existed, and for the first time in years, it felt like enough. On day 5, she found a box on the counter. Inside was a dress, not flashy, not overdone, just perfect. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up. "A favor," he said. "There's a charity gala tomorrow. I'd like you to come." "With you?" "Yes." Brian, her voice cracked. "Don't say no yet. Just try it on." She looked at him quiet, patient, unassuming, and felt the ground shift. Because he wasn't trying to buy her. He was trying to include her. That night, she lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in this cold sky castle of a penthouse, something warm had started, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. But she was certain of one thing. She didn't want to leave. She came for 7 days of cooking. She stayed for something she didn't know how to name. But in the stillness of a billionaire's empty kitchen, she heard her heart start whispering again. Chapter 6. The X at the Gala. Emily had never worn silk before. The fabric slid over her skin like water cool, unfamiliar, honest. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The girl in the reflection wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who could walk into a room full of billionaires and not shrink. But her hands still trembled as she adjusted her earrings, because she knew. Walking beside Brian Carter meant walking into a world that didn't want her. The car ride was quiet. Brian, in a tailored black suit, didn't make small talk. He just looked at her once softly, completely, and said, "If it gets overwhelming, squeeze my hand. Once to stay, twice to leave." She nodded, clutching her clutch like a shield. "And if I spill champagne on someone, then we're leaving with style." The ballroom was gold and chandeliers, soft jazz, glittering gowns, eyes like daggers. The moment they stepped in, heads turned, whispers trailed behind them like perfume. Emily could feel it every inch of her cheap heels sinking into carpet, meant for queens. And then she saw her Isabella Monroe, tall, blonde, poison and diamonds. She glided across the room like someone who'd never been left behind and stopped in front of Brian with a smile too wide to be kind. "Brian," she purred. "What a surprise. And this must be new." Emily stood still, chin high. "Her name is Emily," Brian said, without flinching. "And she's not new. She's mine." Silence. Isabella's smile faltered, just for a breath. "Interesting choice," she said. Emily leaned forward. "We all make surprising choices when we're actually happy." Brian let out the smallest breath of a laugh. Proud. Isabella turned away, defeated, and for the first time, Emily felt tall. But the feeling didn't last. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder. Who is she? Where is she from? She must want his money. By the time Brian returned from a board member's conversation, Emily was staring into a glass of untouched champagne, her back pressed to the edge of the balcony. He approached quietly. "Want to leave?" "Why?" she asked. "'Cause I look like the help." "No." "Because you look like you're about to run." She didn't deny it. Instead, she said what had been haunting her since the first dance ended. "This isn't my world. Brian, I don't know the rules here." "Then we'll write new ones. You're used to being stared at, judged, talked about. So, are you?" he said gently. "You just wore it differently." Her eyes filled, but she didn't blink. "They're never going to see me as enough." "Then they're blind," he said. "Because I already do." She wanted to believe him. She almost did. But somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "He's choosing you now." What happens when the world tells him not to? They danced once more before leaving. And as his hand touched the small of her back, and her fingers folded into his, she thought of how easily a heart can be borrowed, and how terrifying it is to hope it might be kept. She wore the dress, faced the ballroom, survived the stairs. But the hardest part was realizing how much she wanted him to choose her when no one was watching. Chapter 7. The Restaurant That Died. 3 days passed. Brian didn't show up at the cafe. Not in the morning. Not in the afternoon. Not even at table 12, where the cup sat, waiting for a man who at once made it feel like everything was changing. Emily told herself she didn't care, but she checked the clock more often than usual. She stirred her coffee slower, folded napkins with distracted hands. "You okay?" her co-worker asked. "Fine." She lied. "Just tired." But the truth was, something had shifted. The Gala had left a mark she hadn't expected, and the look in his eyes that night, when he said, "I already see you," it had opened a door she wasn't ready to close again. That evening, as she cleaned the countertop, a name floated from the back kitchen. Carter Corporation. She froze. Her coworker was talking to a customer. Yeah, that was the company that bought out all those family-owned places years ago. Remember, the old restaurant on 8th, the one that shut down. "The Park Street Grill," someone replied. "Yep, Carter Corp. bought the block, shut it down." Emily's vision went white. Her heart plummeted. That name, that address, that restaurant, her family's. She ran, didn't clock out, didn't grab her coat. She just ran, hail falling like tiny hammers on her shoulders. When she reached Brian's building, her fist was already clenched. She didn't wait for the elevator. She pounded on his door, like the past was clawing through her chest. He opened it, half surprised, half relieved, until he saw her face. "Emily, did you know?" His silence spoke before his mouth could. "It was your company." She choked. "You're the reason my parents' restaurant died." Brian's expression crumpled. "I didn't know." "Don't lie to me, Emily. I swear. I didn't know it was yours. It was years ago. I didn't oversee every deal, but it was your name on the papers." He stepped forward, gently. "Please, don't walk away like this. Tell me, was this all guilt? Was I just your redemption story?" He flinched. No, it was never about that." "Then what was it?" His voice lowered, raw. "It was you." But she was already backing up, already shaking her head, already breaking apart. "I trusted you," she whispered, "and I never trust anyone." She turned before he could see the tears fall. And this time, he didn't chase her. Back in her apartment, Emily sat on the floor of the kitchen, the same one she used to dream in as a little girl. Helping her parents prep for opening day, she pressed her forehead to her knees. The world spun, and somewhere inside, something she'd just begun to believe in fell silent. She thought he was the first person to give her something back, but in the end, he was the one who'd taken it all away. Chapter 8. The paper on the counter. The days that followed felt like winter, even though spring was blooming outside. Emily moved through her shifts like a shadow quiet, efficient and hollow behind the eyes. Brian didn't come back, not to table 12, not to the cafe, not to her, and maybe that was for the best, because every time she let herself think about him, his voice, his laugh, the way he looked at her like she was more than just someone trying to survive, her throat tightened. She had opened herself once, and this time, she wasn't sure she'd know how to close again. One night, long after closing, she stayed behind to clean. The cafe lights buzzed faintly. Rain tapped against the windows like a quiet memory. She found a napkin on table 12, folded, blank, but weighted. Underneath it was an envelope. No name, just a seal pressed in gold. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a deed, a legal contract, and one single note, handwritten, no repayment, no conditions. It was always yours. Brian. Emily stared. The restaurant, the place her parents built, the one Carter Corp had erased. It was hers now. He had bought it back, quietly, without applause, without even asking to be forgiven. Her knees gave out. She sank to the floor, the envelope pressed to her chest. She didn't know if it was love. She didn't know if it was closure, but she knew. It was something sacred. That night, she walked to his apartment. The same elevator, the same view of the city. He opened the door, stunned, his expression unreadable, hope flickering behind his eyes, like a light he'd been too afraid to turn back on. She didn't speak. She just stepped forward and hugged him, not out of confusion, not by mistake, but with her whole heart quiet, trembling, real. "You gave it back," she whispered. "It was never mine," he said, arms closing around her. "You could have told me. You didn't want words," he replied. "You wanted proof." They stood like that for a long time. No music, no city noise, just silence, and something between them, finally settling. Emily pulled back, eyes damp. "Does this change things?" Brian didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Honestly, only if you wanted to." He didn't ask for a second chance. He just gave her the thing she'd lost, and in that quiet gesture, she found something she never expected to hold again. Trust. Chapter 9. The kiss in the garden. Hospitals smell like waiting. Not sadness exactly, but the kind of silence that holds its breath. Emily sat beside Oliver's bed, his fingers still tucked into hers as the monitors beeped with steady, blessed rhythm. The surgery had gone well. The doctor smiled. The danger had passed, but Emily was still catching up, because all she could think about was Brian. He had shown up that night, no hesitation, no conditions, just a signature, a promise, and his presence. "I'm here," he said. "Whatever it takes." She didn't ask him how much it cost. She didn't try to stop him, because for the first time in her life, someone had shown up when everything was on the line and stayed. Oliver was asleep now. The hallway was quiet, and Emily stepped outside into the small hospital garden, pulling her jacket tight against the spring wind. She sat on the bench where family members had cried, prayed, waited. And then she heard the soft fall of footsteps. He didn't say her name. He just sat beside her, like he'd been doing it his whole life. "You okay?" he asked. "Getting there," she whispered. She didn't look at him, not yet, because her heart was already stirring, asking questions she didn't know how to answer. "You've been quiet," he said. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "You," she said simply. "That's dangerous," he teased, voice gentle. "I know," she murmured, "but I keep doing it anyway." The garden lights flickered under the trees, and finally she turned to face him. For once, he wasn't wearing armor, no tailored suit, no bravado, no mystery, just Brian. A man who had broken something, then stayed to build it back. "You change things," she said. "So, did you—" "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," he whispered. "But I'd rather learn with you than fake it with anyone else." She hesitated, then leaned forward barely an inch and paused. "If you don't want this," she began, but he didn't let her finish. He reached for her with both hands, slowly, reverently, like he was touching something sacred, and kissed her. It wasn't fireworks. It was quiet. It was the end of fear, the beginning of home, the kind of kiss that said, "I've been waiting my whole life for you to say yes." When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together, breath mingling. "Does this mean you're not running anymore?" he asked. Emily smiled through the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I think it means I finally stopped." She kissed him in the place where hope had almost died, and somehow love began to live. Chapter 10. The wedding in the wind. They didn't rush. After the hospital, after the kiss, after the silence between them finally turned to trust, Emily and Brian didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He kept showing up. She kept letting him, and life, in its quiet way, began to feel possible again. The restaurant reopened 3 weeks later. Not a flashy launch. No reporters. Just warm lights, mismatched chairs, and the smell of garlic and rosemary wafting through the air. Emily stood behind the counter, apron tied, eyes bright. And Brian. He sat at table 5 with Oliver, arguing over who got the last piece of garlic bread. "You could have bought 5 restaurants," Emily teased. "I only wanted one," he said, looking at her. "Yours." She rolled her eyes, smiling. "You're still not getting the last breadstick." That night, as they stood together under string lights in the alley behind the restaurant, where the air smelled like old wood and basil, Brian pulled something small from his pocket. Not a grand gesture, not even a speech, just a box and a question. "Marry me," he whispered, "not because we're perfect, but because this, you, is the only thing that ever felt real." Emily stared at the ring. Simple, gold, quiet, just like the way he loved her. She laughed through her tears. "Only if we do it our way." They chose the sidewalk, outside the cafe where they met, where the accident happened, where fate stopped pretending to be subtle. No cathedral, no ballroom, just a folding chair, a bouquet of wildflowers, and Oliver in a wrinkled suit giving her away like he'd been waiting years to do it. Emily wore white, but not the expensive kind. Brian wore no tie, and no mask, and when the wind picked up, lifting the edges of her dress like something out of a dream. He whispered, "You were never a mistake." And she whispered back, "You were never untouchable." They said yes, in front of strangers, in front of the city, in front of the place where it all started. And when they kissed, there were no cameras, no headlines, just two people who found each other through chaos and held on. Later, as they danced barefoot in the street, Brian dipped her low and said, "I was falling the moment you hugged me by mistake. I was falling the moment you let me go." And still stayed. They didn't need chandeliers or vows etched in gold. They just needed a gust of wind, a sidewalk full of memory, and a love that refused to be bought, but stayed anyway, all because of a mistake, narrated like a memory, softly, as if whispering to someone who once stopped believing in love. She never meant to hug him. It was just a moment, 3 seconds of mistaken identity in a crowded terminal. But somehow, that hug was the beginning of trust, of truth, of becoming someone she didn't think she was allowed to be. Brian Carter had everything: money, power, silence, but not one person who looked at him like he was more than the weight of his last name. Until her, Emily Parker had nothing, just a brother she loved, a dream she'd buried, and a life lived in the corners. But she had the one thing the world always forgets how to measure: heart. They came from opposite worlds. He wore suits she couldn't pronounce. She wore secondhand shoes with holes in the soles. And yet, in the end, it wasn't the money. It wasn't the apartment. It wasn't even the restaurant. It was the way they saw each other, completely. So, if you've ever felt too ordinary to be noticed, too broken to be loved, or too far behind to catch up, let this story be a quiet reminder. Sometimes the thing that changes your whole life isn't a plan. It's a mistake, a hug you didn't mean to give, a person you weren't supposed to meet, and a love that doesn't ask for anything but your real self. If this story moved something inside you, stay. The next one goes even deeper. We're just getting started. And hey, if you ever hugged the wrong person and it changed everything, tell us in the comments. You're not alone.